I feel like I took an emotional Cialis. My emotions are hard as a rock.
My emotion boner is straining out of my
loins are
chest?
aflame.
Where does your emotion boner come from?
I think your heart.
Yeah, I got a heart boner.
My arteries are hard for you.
Oh, that's bad.
That's terrible. You're gonna die. Oh no.
Books. 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 Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that is announcing the last days of man.
Here we go.
I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, book gremlin, and I am joined one final time
Boy.
by pal of the pod and companion in
our last days together.
waning days of the world, Maddie Wood.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm ready to end it. I'm ready to see the end.
You're done with humanity.
I'm saying, Lionel, give me your sad final tale.
Oh, and a sad final tale it is.
Oh, boo.
Bow, bow, bow. Bow, 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 bow. End of the world.
Maybe Shock Jock End of the World edition also needs to happen. Because I've had several requests for Regency Shock Jock.
Your number one drive time radio for the apocalypse. Roving bands of marauders. What should you do?
It's plague updates on the 10s. Here with our zombie correspondent.
Well, Brad, they're faster now.
And they've moved on to liking other organs. We're not just focused on brains.
They're diversifying their portfolios, which is something we will also touch on for our apocalyptic stock tips at noon.
Oh, man, I can't wait to hear those, Brad.
Hey, Maddie.
Hey,
Welcome back.
thanks.
Would you like to...
Oh boy, I'll try.
Didn't even have to ask.
All right, so volume 2. We're on the boat to Greece because Raymond has been captured. Perdita says, all y'all get on this damn boat and we are going to get my damn husband / former husband out of trouble. She's an emotional wreck, highs and lows. Poor Perdita. They get there. Guess what? He lives. They get him back. Everything's great. And then he immediately wants to go back to war. And Perdita's like,
What if we didn't?
and instead of being like, okay, cool, I'll just go home, she says, no, we'll all stay. And Raymond's like, it's not enough to just like free the Greeks. We now have to overthrow the Ottoman Empire or the presumed Ottoman Empire and go to Constantinople, which every time you say it makes me think of the They Might Be Giants song, Istanbul, not Constantinople. The plague is there.
Yep.
Plague has come to the Nopal. Do you think people ever called it that?
No.
The Nopal?
Nope, I think that's only you.
Shit. Okay. Well, they get to the Nopal, and I'm going to make it a thing. Stop trying to make Nopal happen.
Nopal's never going to happen.
They get to Constantinople, and there are, like, people fleeing the city, and he's like, ugh, you cowards. And they're like, no, this is, like, cursed with the plague. And he's like, couldn't care.
Sorry to the remaining scions of the Ottoman Empire, but I'm built different.
Oh my god. So they get to the gates and no one will go inside. Even Raymond's poor dog is like laying down in front of him saying, please don't. And Raymond goes in and then the city immediately explodes. Presumably just like launching a cloud of burnt plague dust.
Yep, and we never get any further detail. Did the Ottomans explode it? Did God explode it? Who knows?
Mary said that's not important.
Uh-huh.
I realized I did forget one major thing before we go back to England. Is that before they get to Constantinople, there's a big battle. Lionel is walking through the battlefield after the battle, and comes upon this like shrieking, dying soldier. And spoiler, it's a Vadney who's been like Mulaning herself and dressed as a man and in just like Raymond's army, and now she's dying, but she's having these visions, and she curses Raymond with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And Lionel gets back and is like, hey, man, weirdest thing just happened. And instead of being shocked, Raymond's just like, yeah, I think something might happen. And then it's just like, well, we're doing it. That's my life's only goal anymore. So
let's get down to business to go die for love.
Is it love? Is it ambition?
I meant Evadne.
Oh, yes. She does like a full Eponine.
You know, what I love about having you on the show is your
dated musical references.
Consistent and very hip and very on the nose.
Thank you.
References.
Thank you. There's like 3 people that listen to this podcast that are going to know that I've dropped Eponine and Cosette.
To musicals that are definitely like still a very popular part of the zeitgeist.
Oh my God. Everyone's still talking about them. Constantly. Next, I'll drop some like Cats references. Perdita does not want to come home.
No.
Until Lionel drugs her and puts her on a boat.
Which backfires. Because she wakes up and throws herself into the sea.
Yep. We're back in England. Ryland is the new Lord Protector. And plague is like creeping in.
Yeah.
England is like opening its doors to all these plague refugees. Ryland eventually is like, I'm not going to be the one left holding the bag. No one's going to pay attention to me when I'm a plague-ridden corpse or something. Direct quote. And so he flees.
Straight up dips out.
Is like, deuces. Lionel tries to like fall on the sword a little bit and be like, I'll be Lord Protector. And Adrian's like, no. This is my destiny. So he becomes Lord Protector in as much as I feel like that is a thing at this point.
Yeah.
There's a little scuffle with the Irish.
Yeah.
That he quells. We have a dramatic reading from Macbeth. And by the end of volume 2, there's only like 1,500 people left in England.
Yep.
And they've decided, well, we can't stay here. So we're all going to go together to continental Europe.
And that was where we left the end of volume 2.
And now, volume 3.
Volume 3. Hear you not the rushing sound of the coming tempest? Do you not behold the clouds open, and destruction, lurid and dire, pour down on the blasted earth? Feel you not the earthquake, and open with agonizing groans, while the air is pregnant with shrieks and wailings, all announcing the last days of man? No! None of these things accompanied our fall. The balmy air of spring invested the lovely earth. The buds decked the trees. The flowers adorned the land. Abundant food for man and beast sprung up from the dark ground. Where was pain and evil? Not in the calm air or weltering ocean. Not in the woods or fertile fields, nor among the birds that made the woods resonant with song, nor the animals that in the midst of plenty basked in the sunshine. Our enemy trod our hearts, and no sound was echoed from her steps.
Yeah, so the end of the world is like purely like a man-made thing. Mother Earth keeps on living.
Yeah, Earth
is fine.
Nature is just cruising. Nature is having a great time.
You guys, on the other hand.
And, you know, last episode you kept being like, yeah, not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Here we are.
And here we are.
Whimpering.
The first chapter of volume 3 is essentially like a long eulogy for England.
Well, we know that Lionel loves 2 things, boats and England. So it doesn't surprise me that he would just like wax poetic about his homeland.
Yes, and spoiler alert, because Mary Shelley is very talented and thinks through how things work, it takes a while for them to actually get out of England.
On a swift journey, I take it. All right, cool.
We are leaving Windsor and we are headed to London to meet up with Adrian so that everyone can leave. Everyone is still with us. We've got Adrian, Idris, Lionel, Clara, Alfred, and Evelyn. Everyone is still healthy, except Idris is becoming increasingly...
Oh, is her medical paranoia really ratcheted up?
Yeah, so Idris is beginning what is going to be a kind of long, slow death of despair.
Oh, so she's just gonna like waste away from anxiety.
It's a little more dramatic than that, but it doesn't help.
Okay.
And it's in part because she and Lionel, at the beginning of Volume 3, really seem to grasp for the first time that there is no hope of a future for their own children. And Lionel kind of like takes the time in the narrative to underline like what a particular kind of despair that is.
Yes, because he has like the vision near the end of Volume 2 where his son's at Eton and they're like having this dance or some kind of social event.
Yeah.
And he has the vision of like all of a sudden it kind of like clouds over and it's like, oh, all of you are gonna die.
Yeah. And it, especially like the way that he meditates on what a particular kind of loss it is, once again made me think uncomfortably of right now when we're in this weird societal moment where so much of the overwhelming attitude really just boils down to like, F them kids.
Yeah.
I don't care if there's a future. I don't care what I am leaving behind for future generations, even their own kids. They just don't care. And to have someone really meditating on like what a piercing
sorrow, it is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Maybe we should make a pamphlet and just like send it. Or like some of those creepy Christian letters I get that are hand addressed.
Yeah.
I don't know. Send it to certain zip codes that I feel like fall into this. I don't know. There's got to be a system.
Just pull some really choice quotes from the novel and just start circuit. Yeah.
Type them in like 32-point font Comic Sans. Underline a lot of stuff.
And so we kind of dwell on that, and then we dwell on sort of in the face of that, the absurdity of some people's kind of remaining priorities. It says, many of those who remained secluded themselves. Some had laid up stores which should prevent the necessity of leaving their homes. Some deserted wife and child, and imagined that they secured their safety in utter solitude. Such had been Ryland's plan, and he was discovered dead and half devoured by insects in a house many miles from any other, with piles of food laid up in useless superfluity. Others made long journeys to unite themselves to those they loved, and arrived to find them dead. Now each life was a gem, each human breathing of far, far more worth than the subtlest imagery of sculptured stone.
Oh. Mary's like, I'm really going to bring you down.
Yeah.
If you weren't brought down enough, here you go. Every life is precious.
Every life is precious. And that's another point that we're going to kind of circle back to over and over.
Wild that she would write a book where one of the like key takeaways is every life is precious after the love of her life has died and her best friend has died.
A couple of her kids and...
Yeah, I don't know what would have informed that.
Yeah. But she also, like, I love that, again, this is one of those things that you kind of only get by reading it, but this whole first section of Volume 3 that's this kind of ongoing eulogy for mankind. She goes big picture with it, too, and she has this whole section where Verney is kind of leaving behind a testament to all of the things that were unique in terms of mankind and his abilities, and...
like an ode to humans.
Yeah, and it says, farewell to the giant powers of man, to the knowledge that could pilot the deep-drawing bark through the opposing waters of shoreless ocean, to the power that could set in motion wheels and beams and vast machinery. Farewell to the arts, to eloquence, poetry, and deep philosophy, to the graceful building, which in its perfect proportion transcended the rude forms of nature. Farewell to painting, the high-wrought sentiment and deep knowledge of the artist's mind in pictured canvas. Farewell to music and the sound of song. Farewell to the well-trod stage. A truer tragedy is enacted on the world's ample scene that puts to shame mimic grief. To high-bred comedy and the low buffoon, farewell. Man may laugh no more.
I'm struck by the fact that I feel like a different person would not have taken the time to go this in depth, really tease out all of these things that it's not just like life that you're losing, but it's all the things that make a good life or that make a full life or a complete life.
Yeah.
And she's like very much like, oh no, we're going to dig in. you're gonna feel regret.
Like, you're gonna survive, but like, what for?
Right? I'm gonna scrape every little bit of happiness out.
It's funny because it makes it so much more bleak, but it also, I find it so much more compelling and more poignant than a lot of the sort of narratives that have followed it, because that's not a thing we're preoccupied with much anymore.
No, and I think if it does, it gets very wrapped up in like individual people in the narrative, or like the loss of like individuals, not the loss of like what it is to be human as a whole.
Yeah. Just like, goodbye to everything cool that humans can do.
And I guess in some ways, goodbye to all the bad things too. Like if it's like, this is also the great equalizer, is it also like goodbye to like discrimination? Goodbye to class warfare. Goodbye to social castes.
I'll let you...
I'm gonna guess no. Okay. Never mind.
I'll let you decide for yourself.
That means no.
But after we make it through our eulogy, just we sort of get back into action. And the year, it is 2096.
And we're getting on a boat.
And it is time to leave England. Eventually.
Mary says, I'm drawing this shit out.
I mean, and it's one of those things where it's so like, of course you wouldn't be able to get 1,500 people in the middle of a plague to leave punctually.
No.
Like, I can't get my friends to show up to a thing on time.
You couldn't get that to happen now with cell phones.
And so the idea is that they are supposed to leave on November 25th. This is very important.
Okay.
We repeated enough times that I'm like, I get it. We were supposed to leave on
Heard,
November
Mary.
25th. Lionel and his family travel from Windsor to London. Adrian has sent messengers basically over the entirety of England to try and make sure that they get every last remaining soul.
Are people allowed to say, no, I'm just going to stay where I am? Or is it just like so strongly discouraged that everyone obeys?
She doesn't really get into that much. I think the implication, especially in the earlier section where they're talking about the people who like decided to hide out, died.
The people that are left are people that want to be with other people.
Yes, and they want to, I think they want to make sure that they don't leave anyone behind by accident.
Gotcha.
And the gang is truly all here. The Ice Queen, remember her?
Oh, she's back.
She's back. And she still hates Lionel.
Where's she been?
Hanging out in
Somewhere.
a villa somewhere.
Cool.
And just to prove that for old women, grudges never die, she still refuses to look at or acknowledge Lionel.
That's cool. Even at the end of the world.
Even at the end of the world.
That's nice of her.
And then the worst happens. At least in terms of their little family.
One of the children falls ill.
How did you know?
Now here's the thing. Will it be Clara, their niece, their orphan niece, or will it be one of their actual children? Actual children is a bigger blow, plot-wise. Clara is already such a sad sack. Circumstance-wise. Who is it?
All right. So Lionel and Adrian are out canvassing London, trying to gather people together. And little Alfred falls ill.
My boy!
And Idris panics, leaves Clara in charge, and goes running out into the streets in the rain, just like screaming Lionel's name and crying.
Yeah, that's something that's really good to do when you're already in really frail health.
Uh-huh. She like falls and collapses, and a woman helps her. And meanwhile, Lionel gets back to the house. And then the weirdest fucking thing in the whole book happens. And I'm just going to read you the passage.
Okay.
Because I don't know what to make of it.
Great.
There was an assemblage of persons under the portico of the house, in whose gestures I instinctively read some new misfortune. With swift alarm, afraid to ask a single question, I leapt from my horse. Rushing upstairs, and hearing a groan, without reflection, I threw open the door of the first room that presented itself. I felt my leg clasped, and a groan repeated by the person that held me. I lowered my lamp, and saw a black man, half-clad, writhing under the agony of disease, while he held me with a convulsive grasp. With mixed horror and impatience, I strove to disengage myself, and fell on the sufferer. He wound his naked, festering arms around me. His face was close to mine, and his breath, death-laden, entered my vitals. I sprung up, threw the wretch from me, and darting up the staircase, entered the chamber usually inhabited by my family.
Why?
I genuinely don't know.
Okay, so in this scene, Alfred's already ill.
Alfred is ill. Lionel is
trying to find. He's like, oh god, there's like something's bad's happening, and he's running into the building that they live in. And for some reason, instead of going up to where the floor he lives in, he goes into this random other room and like contracts the plague. Okay.
From the only person of color
that's ever mentioned in the book.
Correct. And who is never mentioned again. And it doesn't say black man, by the way. But it doesn't say the
full.
It doesn't say the most offensive thing it could say.
Okay.
And then he contracts the plague. I have no idea what to make of it.
Yeah, that's a really weird choice.
It's a really weird choice.
Because wouldn't it have made more sense to, like, your kid already has it? If you want Lionel to get the plague, have him get it from Alf. Like, that makes so much more sense.
It's deeply strange.
Are we supposed to maybe imply that Alfred got it from this person as well?
No, I don't.
Do we ever go into how we think Alfred gets ill?
No.
Okay, cool.
I don't.
Does anyone get the plague and not die?
Put a pin in that.
Up until this point, I guess.
Up until this point, no.
Great.
And so I have read, I looked for scholarship being like,
why is this choice?
Why is the only black character in this book the person who gives
the main character
the plague? Because what's baffling about it is if it was just
of the time racism.
Yeah, if it was straight up meant to be just like, ooh, like scary people of color are disease bringers, then like,
why not have that be more of a point in the whole story?
Right. It never comes up before and it never comes up again. And I have to admit, like, some of the scholarship I read...
Is there scholarship about this point?
There is, not a ton, but a fair amount of it just felt like a real stretch in either direction because people are trying to spin whole theses out of one line that never comes up, but it's never referred to again.
It's very strange. I'm, like, racking my brain for, like, why... From a storytelling perspective, like, what that's supposed to... propel forward in any way.
All I can think is like one of two things. It's either, and this is, I want to be clear, this is like my personal opinion as a person who has like studied literature. It's one of two things. Either Mary Shelley in the middle of the novel was like, and also people of color are gross and full of disease.
Dirty.
Or Mary Shelley was trying to make some kind of a point about how, and I swear to God, I'm not trying to give her too much credit here, but this is one of the only things that makes sense to me, is that she got over her skis and was trying to make some kind of a very poorly done point about the slave trade. She was like, ooh, and also, like, remember all those people you oppressed? Like, you have to pay the piper eventually. And she just, was doing too many things.
And then just, like, forgot to ever tie it together.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible.
Because the thing is, like, we know that she and Percy Shelley were overtly opposed to transatlantic slavery. We know that they ultimately, like, did not believe in class or oppression, which does not mean that they weren't sort of lazily...
No, but it makes your first theory all the stranger.
Right. It doesn't mean that they weren't also lazily bigoted like everybody else was. But
they were at least trying.
Right, and they had, like, formalized beliefs around oppression and exploitation that they wrote about, that we can prove.
Do you think it's, like, something about, like, not wanting his son to be the one who gave it to him, but she needed him to get it?
I don't think that has anything to do with it, because the novel is not preoccupied with how people get sick. Right? One of the hardest things to wrap your head around with this novel from a modern perspective is that we are not sitting down tracking like chains of contagion. It's not. This novel at no point is thinking particularly hard about like, oh, you get it, and so then you got it, and then you got it from this person, and you got it from, like, that's not a thing that they are really worried about.
So foreign.
Except in this one.
Yeah, except in this one hyper-specific situation. Maybe as you tell the rest of Volume 3, I'll keep thinking about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what to make of it. I swear I am not trying to be like a out-of-hand apologist. It's confusing, and I have yet to read any scholarship about it that I think sheds any more light on the situation.
How odd.
Yeah. Anyway, Alfred's dead.
Oh. So that was going to be my other question is, like, I know that they don't get into it, but now I'm going to assume, like, it moves swiftly.
Yes.
Like, you do not linger in sickness. If he went out to do this errand with Adrian and Alfred's already dead.
Yeah.
Okay.
He gets upstairs. Alfred is dead. He lingers at the side of his child and, like, kisses his dead little face and is very sad. But, of course, Idris is missing. So then he has to go. He runs back downstairs. We hop on the horse. We go scoop Idris very romantically out of the street in the rain, and we put her on our horse and we take her back home, and they climb in bed together. We have this really interesting section where Lionel is like, I'm finally happy.
What?
Well, hear me out. That was the last moment of my happiness, but I was happy. Idris must die, for her heart was broken. I must die, for I had caught the plague. All right, well, welcome, Dumpling, to the podcast. Earth was a scene of desolation. Hope was madness. Life had married death. They were one. But, supporting my fainting love, feeling that I must soon die, I reveled in the delight of possessing her once more. Again and again I kissed her, and pressed her to my heart.
Okay, so I know everything from here on out is going to be trash. So I'm just going to hold on to this, like, one little last moment.
I don't even think it's that. I think he's truly reconciled himself to death in this moment.
Yeah, he's made his peace.
My wife and I are going to die in each other's arms, and we have had, you know, up until this catastrophe happened, we had a wonderful life together. Like, we have loved truly and well, and we had children that we doted on, and now we're just going to die in each other's arms, and I can accept this.
I'm going to guess that Mary doesn't allow that to occur. I'm going to guess that Lionel wakes up the next morning, and Idris is dead, and Alfred is dead, and somehow he's alive.
So Lionel fully gets the plague.
Great.
It is apparently extremely painful, and he loses consciousness in a matter of about 3 days. And then something interesting happens.
He lives.
To the eye and touch of all, I was dead. With earnest prayer, almost with force, Adrian tried to draw Idris from me. She shook her head and wiped a stealing tear from her sunk cheek, but would not yield. She kissed my closed eyes and pallid lips and pressed my stiffening hands to her beating heart. While hanging over me and mourning in silent, bitter thought for the loss of all love that had been enshrined in my heart, her disheveled hair hung over her face, and the long tresses fell on the bed. She saw one ringlet in motion, and the scattered hair slightly stirred, as by a breath. It is not so, she thought, for he will never breathe more. Till the whole ringlet waved back, and she thought she saw my breast heave.
Okay, so were we dead and now we're alive? Were we full, or were we just, like, so near death that we had, like, our breathing had, like, heart rate had slowed so much? Or are we to believe he, like, comes back from the dead?
Unclear.
Because, you know, she does that in another book.
You know, that's like a thing of her.
You know, that's like a thing she's, like, really into. It's like people coming back from the dead.
I hadn't really thought about that.
She's horny for that.
Well, either he somehow died and is resurrected in full Christ figure fashion, or he looked dead and Idris saved him by refusing to give up on him, which does uncomfortably beg the question whether we've been burying other people alive this whole time.
Oh.
But the novel does not have time for that question.
Neither here nor there.
But Lionel is the first person ever to survive the plague.
So I take it he not only breathes, but, like, recovers.
He recovers and, like, weirdly comes back better, faster, stronger.
Okay. He's a Kanye song.
Says, my body was exuberant with health. I thought I could emulate the speed of the racehorse, discern through the air objects at a blinding distance. My senses had become so refined and susceptible after my recovery from mortal disease.
He's back and he's better than ever.
He's back and he's better than ever. And now we have to reroute everything to go save f***ing Lucy. Who is Lucy, do you ask?
Yeah, am I supposed to remember who that is?
You're not. This is the first time we're hearing of her.
Oh, okay. Why do we have to go save her if we haven't even been introduced to her yet?
Because she is one of those too good, too pure, frail baby angel characters who inevitably appear in a crisis to cause a problem for everyone.
Okay, well, what is Angel Baby Lucy's deal?
We are going to have to skim right over her mostly, except to say that she's one of those people who just can't catch a break, and her husband was awful, but then her husband died, and now she's devoted to her aging and ill mother, and she and her mother are trapped in Windsor, and Lionel has to go fucking get her and bring her to London so that she can be saved along with everyone else, because otherwise she's going to be left completely alone with her dying mother in the now empty England.
Okay. Onward.
Uh-huh. And so we got to reroute back to Windsor to get Lucy. And Idris insists on coming.
Oh. It just never bodes well.
No, guess what happens?
I'm gonna guess Idris gets ill.
Idris dies.
Great.
Idris just f***ing dies.
Like, she just gives out, or does she get the plague?
It's cold. She's never really recovered from
The death and the sadness and the
and there's
frailty.
And there's snow.
Sure.
And there's an interesting recurring thing where Lionel never seems to be around when people important to him die. Like, Alfred dies while he's out and about. Idris dies alone in a carriage while he's trying to, like, get her somewhere warm. He comes back and she's just dead.
Oh.
Yeah.
Lionel.
But conveniently, they're at Windsor Castle, so he puts her in the tomb with her son and her forebears.
Okay.
And the Countess of Windsor appears because she was having visions that her daughter was in trouble.
Ice Queen.
Yes, the Ice Queen. And Lionel and the Ice Queen have a touching reconciliation.
Oh, she'll look him in the face?
Yeah, over the tomb. She actually calls him her son.
Oh.
Which is nice.
Twist.
Yeah.
Okay, but so he comes back to London with Lucy, but not his wife.
Correct.
Okay.
And then and then Lucy's just kind of gone.
Great. That segue seemed necessary to kill his wife.
Anyway, it's time to leave England for real, definitely, actually, this time.
This time, we mean it.
And so
no more Lucys.
No more.
To the boat.
To the boat! So, the way that this has been done is that they have broken up the remaining group of people into, like, 3 sections. And 2 of them have already been sent across the English Channel to Paris by the time we finish getting rid of half of Lionel's remaining family.
Cool.
The last section of people make it to Dover and are immediately stalled by catastrophic storms on a never-before-seen scale.
Wow. We would know literally nothing about that.
No.
As a hurricane just destroyed western North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
A hurricane.
In the mountains.
In the Appalachian Mountains.
You know, there's these waves that are like surmounting the cliffs of Dover. Like it's an insane.
Do they get off the boat or do they stay on the boat?
They're not yet on a boat. Dover's where you get on the boat to go to Calais, because that's like the shortest. Back when we did.
So they're not boating from London to Dover to, I see.
Correct. So they are at Dover to
Just
get on a
waiting.
boat. Waiting.
Is Adrian with them, or did he go with one of the first 2
Adrian is
groups?
with us. So they are all
Okay.
together.
Okay.
There's a brief thing where 3 suns rise at once, which is, we can all agree, a great sign.
That always bodes well.
And after that happens, the weather breaks, and on the horizon, they see a boat, a little boat, with 9 dudes in it.
Oh.
Who are all fucking furious with each other.
Oh.
And we find out that the people waiting for them in Paris have devolved into 3 rival factions who are on the brink of violence.
And these are all still just the British people. They did not meet French people when they arrived.
So the countryside of France was completely deserted. And when they get to Paris, it says that they found a couple of hundred people who I can never resist, especially from English writers, that weird little intra-European jab. The very few remaining French, it says, resigned to their coming fate, flitted about the streets of the capital, and assembled to converse of past times, with that vivacity and even gaiety that seldom deserts the individuals of that nation. So, vive la France! Shelley thinks.
She says, you flighty little bitches.
Flighty but cheerful.
Yep.
She's like, well, you'll just be partying.
You'll die in happiness.
You'll literally party to the end.
So these factions are mostly
the factions
British.
have entirely sprung up among the English.
Okay.
The French do kind of tell them, like, hey, if you don't want to die, you should get the fuck out of France. It's this is a bad place.
We're cooked.
You know, if you lost hundreds of thousands, we lost thousands of thousands. If you stay here, you will become a corpse.
Cool.
But the English...
So let's fight amongst ourselves instead.
So here's the thing. They've divided into 3 sections. 2 of the sections are just kind of one of those happenstance things that occurs where the first group got there first and the second group got there second. And by virtue of kind of being in
first and second
tight-knit groups, they just sort of an antipathy kind of happened. And the third, from the year of our Lord 2024, the third faction was formed by a sectarian, a self-erected prophet who, while he attributed all power and rule to God, strove to get the real command of his comrades into his own hands. This third division consisted of the fewest individuals, but their purpose was more one, their obedience to their leader more entire. During the whole progress of the plague, the teachers of religion were in possession of great power, a power of good if rightly directed, or of incalculable mischief if fanaticism or intolerance guided their efforts. In the present instance, a worse feeling than either of these actuated the leader. He was an impostor in the most determined sense of the term, a man who had early in life lost all sense of rectitude or self-esteem, and who, when ambition was awakened in him, gave himself up to its influence, unbridled by any scruple.
Are you telling me that Mary Shelley wrote a book about the world ending via plague that has a Donald Trump character in it? Is that what you're telling me right now?
I'm not telling you that.
You're telling me that there's a cult of personality?
There's a cult of personality around a man who is manipulating other people's religious belief, but
for his own benefit.
For his own benefit, and who specifically does not actually have any religious belief of his own.
I am done with this book. I'm done. This is the rudest thing you've ever made me do.
What, you don't love that Mary Shelley predicted the current American political landscape from 1826, and the only reason none of us were warned is because the book was unpopular because people thought it was too much of a downer to read?
And then it didn't get republished until the 1960s, and we still ignored it because Frankenstein. Ugh. Ugh. I am perturbed.
So the preacher, as they call him, that's his only title.
Double yuck.
Is leading this third faction, and he is totally okay with violence because he doesn't care. He just wants power at all costs. He doesn't.
Sure.
He does not care if he accidentally kills off a substantial chunk of the few remaining humans.
Yeah, because like you kill a dozen people and that's like 10%.
And so these men have come back to find Adrian because they're like, you are the only way that this isn't going to end in serious bloodshed. And so Adrian and Lionel and 12 other dudes get back on the tiny fucking boat and manually row themselves across the English Channel.
It's a good thing that Lionel came back as like Superman, so he could probably just propel them across the English Channel like nobody's business.
And then they get to the other side of the English Channel, and there's this whole thing where, like, of course, horses, right, are a problem. You need them to get places,
Sure.
but you can't just, like, go to a stable anymore. You
No.
have to individually catch every horse that you need to ride.
This has taken on a weird, like, almost Cormac McCarthy, like, Western vibe.
Yes. And so in the process of having to consistently, because you can only ride a horse for so long before.
Well, right. That's why you had inns where you would stop and rest your horses.
Right. So every time they need to change horses, they have to just like let go of the old one and then catch a new one. And as a result of this
justice for these horses,
as
too.
a result of this, like, frankly slapstick process.
Yes.
They keep losing dudes, like, who are going to catch up eventually, but, like, because you can only catch so many horses at a time.
Right. So it's like, okay, you forego. Who's on first?
So by the time they finally get to Paris, it's just Lionel and Adrian.
Of course. Of course.
They show up and they barely manage to stop what sounds like the opening scene of Gangs of New York. You know, like everyone's coming in with their little different gangs.
Cool.
And their weapons. The first two parties immediately back down. You know, Adrian does the same thing he did with the Irish, where he gives them a speech about how important.
Let me guess that the preacher's people are not wooed by reason.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Because they're religious maniacs led by a grifter. When Adrian tries to get him to calm down, he basically goes on a tirade about, you know, you have to repent. We're all suffering for your sins, O generation of unbelief. You are the reason that this is still happening because you haven't repented.
I will say again, perturbed. But okay. All right. Great.
Adrian's response gives me, what's the guy who wrote The West Wing? Aaron Sorkin. Adrian's response feels a little bit like lib centrist.
I love it.
Aaron Sorkin.
The Newsroom or whatever that one was called, that everyone quotes that Jeff Daniels speech from the pilot or something that Martin Sheen says as the president.
Imagine this in like an Aaron Sorkin fever dream being said by, you know, Jeff Daniels. Why not?
Sure.
Says, "My good fellow," said Adrian with quiet scorn, "I wish that you were ignorant only. And I think it would be no difficult task to prove to you that you speak of what you do not understand. On the present occasion, however, it is enough for me to know that you seek nothing of us, and heaven is our witness, we seek nothing of you. I should be sorry to embitter by strife the few days any of us here may have to live. Go home or stay. Pray to your God in your own mode. Your friends may do the like. My orisons consist in peace and goodwill, in resignation and hope. Farewell!"
Here's a guess. The preacher is not going to let them just say, toodaloo.
This accomplishes exactly nothing.
Of course not. You can't use reason.
And the problem is, again, there are not that many of them, and this guy is running a cult.
Mm-hmm.
They hit an impasse in that the people who are not in the cult, especially Adrian and Lionel, cannot decide if they should just abandon these people.
Yes.
Well, but there are only so many people left, and he's a monster, but his followers aren't, right? They're just misguided and frightened and being manipulated by a frightening figurehead.
Sure.
And again, every life is precious, right? So, like, do we just leave these people to flame out when they're like a good third of all the remaining humans?
Good question. My guess is that soft-hearted Adrian says we must regroup.
So what I think is really interesting about the way that all of this resolves is that sanity and patience and love kind of don't really win the day.
Because that's real life.
Uh-huh.
At least she was realistic about that.
And so
I'll forgive her for giving the whole thing wrong about, oh, all the rich just finally said, open my doors and take my wares, and I'll split up all my land for the sake of not just fellow English people, but refugees? Mary.
Do you want another passage that's deeply uncomfortable to read from the year of our Lord 2024?
The answer is no, but I know that that's not the option, so go on. On you go.
If we had considered the preacher as sincere in a belief of his own denunciations, we should have immediately addressed ourselves to him, and endeavored with our best arguments to soften and humanize his views. But he was instigated by ambition. He desired to rule over these last stragglers from the fold of death. His projects went so far as to calculate that if, from these crushed remains, a few survived so that a new race might spring up, he might, by holding tight the reins of belief, be remembered by the post-pestilential race as a patriarch, a prophet, nay, a deity. These ideas made him inflexible in his rule and violent in his hate of any who presumed to share with him his usurped empire.
Okay, but did they lead with the story about how Raymond got turned into a cloud? A plague cloud?
And then Shelley goes on in the same section to explain that it is a strange fact that people who mean to do good, who are patient, reasonable, and gentle, and use the truth, have less influence than he who, grasping and selfish, refuses not to adopt any means, nor awaken any passion, nor diffuse any falsehood for the advancement of his cause.
No, the old squeaky wheel.
Just like, wow, it's funny how, like,
nothing's changed. Everyone's the same. It's funny how human nature is what it is.
And so we kind of have to yada yada some of this in the interest of time.
Sure.
But exactly. Do you remember the woman who randomly helped Idris when she was collapsing in the street?
Oh, is she gonna circle back?
That woman's name is Juliet.
Okay.
Juliet is in the cult.
Of course she is.
And Lionel really wants to get her out of there.
Okay.
In remembrance of his wife.
Yes, of course. And if we could save but one soul.
Very much so.
Okay.
He goes in, he tries to get her to leave with him. She won't do it. She's really like lost in the sauce.
Does he appeal to her like, you're the one who helped me, like my wife? Like, does he bring any of that up in an attempt to like lure her out?
So Juliet has a baby that she dotes, like she's obsessed with. I guess more so than is normal.
That's an interesting point, but okay. She loves her baby? Yuck.
Let me rephrase. Her baby is the last thing she has to live for.
Okay.
The man she was with is dead. She doesn't have any family left. All she has is this infant. And he tries to convince her to leave for the good of her baby. And he gets captured by the cult people, and then he gets put in a dungeon, and then she lets him out, but it turns out that like the preacher sent her to let him out and is holding her baby hostage. And then there's a whole thing where they decide to kind of half give up on the cult people, and Lionel actually starts to leave for Switzerland with half of the people and leaves Adrian behind, but then he suddenly realizes that he should never have left Adrian behind because at the end of the day,
they're brothers.
They are the great loves of each other's life. And he does an about face and he flees back to Paris, and there's a very romantic scene where he comes running in, screaming Adrian's name, and then throws himself on the floor to like kiss the very ground where he trods.
Oh.
That's
romanticism for you, everybody.
He literally rides a horse to death.
Jesus.
And then does the like Helm's Deep, throws the doors open.
All right.
Screaming Adrian's name girlishly.
Who will ride with Rohan?
Yes.
Adrian! Adrian!
And it turns out he has arrived in the immediate aftermath of an assassination attempt.
On Adrian.
On Adrian. By one of the cult members.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that enough to make Adrian say?
No.
Oh, okay.
So that happens, and then at the same time, the cult self-destructs.
Oh, okay.
But the reason it self-destructs is fascinating.
I'm pulling out my notes app.
Are you ready for this?
Sure.
So the whole thing with this cult, right, is that he convinced people to join the cult by telling them that he would keep them from getting the plague. And that if they followed him and repented and did everything he told them...
Oh, does someone get the plague?
That none of them would get sick. But of course, that's not possible.
Correct.
And so when people start getting sick...
He probably does that thing at the beginning where he's like, well, you just didn't repent enough.
No.
Oh.
Ready?
Yeah.
Those who sickened were immediately and quietly withdrawn. The cord and a midnight grave disposed of them forever, while some plausible excuse was given for their absence. At last, a woman, whose maternal vigilance subdued even the effects of the narcotics administered to her, became a witness to their murderous designs on her only child. Mad with horror, she would have burst among her deluded fellow victims, wildly shrieking, when the impostor, in his last act of rage and desperation, plunged a knife in her bosom. Thus wounded to death, her garments dripping with her own lifeblood, bearing her strangled infant in her arms, Juliet, for it was she, denounced to the host of deceived believers the wickedness of their leader.
Oh, damn. Really out in a flame. Flame out.
So they were strangling people to death.
As soon as they started to show any kind of symptom.
Any kind of illness whatsoever.
They were just like, you're donezo.
They've been murdering people this whole time, and there's only like
500 people left.
And when he sees the jig is up, the preacher shoots himself.
Oh.
Yep.
A coward's way out.
Yep.
On brand.
And so the whole cult just flames out.
Well, off to Switzerland.
A literal death cult. Anyway, yeah, so none of that feels...
I wanted there to be more tangible, helpful things in that last part.
Nope.
Cool.
Nope. Mary Shelley says the only way to solve these problems is to wait for them to flame out, I guess.
Mary, that's not great.
But it might be accurate.
But it's probably true.
And so, yeah, that's the end of the cult. And like you said, it's Switzerland time.
I mean, a notoriously neutral place.
The few straggling remains.
Do they bring with them the, like, couple Parisians, or is it...
Yes.
Okay.
So everyone left of the cult and most of the remaining French, everyone just kind of comes together.
And off to Switzerland.
Because
Okay.
the idea is that, you know, like summer is nigh.
It's cold there.
It's right. So the idea is they're going to go spend the rest of the summer in Switzerland and then they'll migrate south for winter. And they're ultimately trying to get to Rome with kind of the understanding that maybe in the glory and the godliness of Rome, we can bring ourselves to greater acceptance of our fate, because no one really seems to have any illusions anymore that
Everyone's like made their bed with like, we're all gonna die.
yes,
It's just in what timeline?
yes. And
Okay.
I think the idea is like, well, we can all die closer to God
Okay.
in Rome.
Okay.
And so we hit the road
Off to Switzerland.
off to Switzerland. The most interesting thing that happens on the way to Switzerland is that they have two supernatural experiences
Ooh.
that
Spooky.
are fascinating. So the first one is they're going down the road and they see a figure in all white, now throwing up its arms, now leaping to an astonishing height in the air, gesturing violently. As it became darker, there was something appalling even to the incredulous in the lonely specter, whose gambols were beyond human powers. By the time I came up, the fright experienced by the spectators of this ghostly exhibition began to manifest itself in the flight of some and the close huddling together of the rest. Our goblin now perceived us. He approached, and as we drew reverentially back, made a low bow. The sight was irresistibly ludicrous even to our hapless hand, and his politeness was hailed by a shout of laughter. Then again, springing up, as a last effort, it sunk to the ground and became almost invisible through the dusky night. It was an opera dancer. Falling sick, he had been deserted by his companions. In an access of delirium, he had fancied himself on the stage. And, poor fellow, his dying senses eagerly accepted the last human applause that could ever be bestowed on his grace and agility.
Okay, so is this an alive person or the ghost of a person?
It is an alive person who is delirious.
But trained to jump higher than can be humanly done?
I think the idea is that it's so out of place.
Ah, okay.
The two things that are important with these supernatural encounters is that these people are, I mean, not that she would use the word, these people are traumatized.
Yes.
I think part of what it's underlining is that the sight of another living being at all
Is so jarring.
let alone the sight of a dancer, an acrobat, which wouldn't faze you in context. But
to just run into on the side of the road.
You can imagine it would be really creepy in the middle of the end of the world to come along someone alone on a rural road doing like an acrobatic routine.
Yeah, that sounds insane.
In full costume.
Yes, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah. And then the other supernatural encounter they have is there start being these rumors of what they call the Black Spectre, which is this man all in black wearing like mourning clothes on a enormous black horse who like is only seen at night. You know, the rumors start to spread, and then the people are saying like, oh, like, you know, it gets cold when he approaches and he's bigger than life, and oh, when you're about to die, the Black Spectre will come. And this goes on for like a number of weeks as they're traveling, and they're going down the road, and finally they encounter the man himself by his horse. He's fallen off. He's lying in the road. And before he dies, he explains that he had been left alone. During many months, he had wandered, seeking some survivor for a companion. When he discovered our troop, fear of contagion conquered his love of society. He dared not join us, yet could not resolve to lose sight of us. Which is an absolutely haunting concept.
Like, I'm too scared to be with you, but I can't be without you.
Yep. And
Terrifying.
So he's just been following them in the dark for weeks.
Terrifying. All right, Mary. I've had about enough of you.
And yeah, we're gonna do a little yada-yadaing. The Countess of Windsor dies finally in Dijon. Although it doesn't seem like she dies of the plague, she just dies because she's old.
She's old.
She has a pretty nice and peaceful end. There's a lovely little section where Shelley goes out of her way to explain that the Countess of Windsor, having seen the error of her ways after the death of her daughter, puts the work in to regain her son and her grandchildren's trust. And
okay, they end on a good note.
Yes, she dies at peace, surrounded by Clara and Lionel and Adrian, and it's...
And what's the other?
Evelyn.
Evelyn.
The little boy.
Wait, Evelyn's a boy?
Evelyn's a boy.
Oh.
Evelyn used to be a boy's name.
Interesting.
Yeah. They make it to the mountains in Switzerland. I wish I had more time for this, but there's a lovely passage where they get part of the way up the mountain and they hit a overlook, and all of them just suddenly stop and are overwhelmed with the absolute beauty of the valleys below them.
Yeah, because again, Mother Earth is like, I'm fine.
Yeah, pretty much.
Everything is cool.
And then the last anecdote of humanity, really, like the last story we get about anyone who is not our remaining, sort of 4 important family members, is in the mountains, almost immediately after they have this really transcendental experience where they are reminded of the majesty of the world and they are brought comfort by it in a very serious way. They hear organ music.
Oh.
They follow the sound of the music, and it's this little church in the middle of nowhere. And they go in, and there is a young woman playing the organ for her blind father, who doesn't know that the plague has happened.
Oh.
She has been playing for him every day and has not told him that the world is ending.
Oh. Okay. It's like beautiful and so sad.
Yeah. And again, this is, I think, one of Shelley's last goodbyes to humanity in the novel, because she sees them and she freaks out. Basically, the day that they arrive, she has started showing symptoms of the plague.
Oh.
And her only remaining fear was that she was about to leave her blind father,
who knows none of this is happening,
alone at the end of the world.
Uh-huh.
She had brought him to the church, basically like, I'm just going to play until I can't play anymore. And this is how we close chapter 7. We came to her like visitors from heaven itself. Her high-wrought courage fled with the appearance of relief. With a shriek, she rushed towards us, embraced the knees of Adrian, and uttering but the words, "Oh, save my father," with sobs and hysterical cries, opened the long-shut floodgates of her woe. She and her father now lie side by side, beneath the high walnut tree where her lover reposes, and which in her dying moments she pointed out to us. Her father, at length aware of his daughter's danger, unable to see the changes of her dear countenance, obstinately held her hand till it was chilled and stiffened by death. They rest beneath the sod, the tree their monument. The hallowed spot is distinct in my memory. And though her hand be cold, still I think the sounds of divine music which they loved wander about, solacing their gentle ghosts.
Mary, you're really, it's it's just like, it's so sad. Like, it's so lovely and so sad.
Yeah. And that's the last story we get of sort of humanity.
Of like anyone others. Okay.
After this, they make it to the part of Switzerland they were trying to get to. And by the time they get there, the last person who isn't the four of them has died.
Between the journey and just the plague and the... Okay.
They inter the last victim in a glacier.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So cool.
And that's the end of the plague.
Well, right, because then it's just the four of them, and if none of them have the plague...
Yeah.
And at that point, we're just assuming there's no one else?
Well, it says, with this last victim, plague vanished from the earth. Death had never wanted weapons wherewith to destroy life, and we, few and weak as we had become, were still exposed to every other shaft which his full quiver teemed. But pestilence was absent from among them. For 7 years it had held full sway upon the earth. She had trod every nook of our spacious globe. She had mingled with the atmosphere, which as a cloak enwraps all our fellow creatures. The inhabitants of Europe, the luxurious Asiatic, the African and free American had been vanquished and destroyed by her.
Okay, so then there's the four of them.
So then it's just the four of them. But
in Switzerland.
in Switzerland, Lionel and Adrian are left with these two children.
Mm-hmm.
Clara is 14. Evelyn is ? Small.
Small. Okay.
Small. Well, I mean, if the plague's been going for 7 years, he's got to be at least 7.
Right. If not slightly older.
It
But
doesn't
not much.
It doesn't seem like it. I also think Mary lost track of her own timeline here a little bit because they very much treat Evelyn like he's a little boy, not like a almost tween.
Right. Okay.
Adrian and Lionel sort of talk, and Adrian calls them two melancholy blasted trees where once a forest waved.
Mary. Ma'am.
They go to Italy for a while, just the four of them. They go to Milan, and they're just sort of ambling around. And
Yeah, because, like, what do you do?
And I kind of have to yada yada this, but Adrian and Lionel devote themselves to making the children as happy as they possibly can. And so they set them up in a villa, and they, like, bring them gifts, and they're foraging for food and just doing everything they can to make Evelyn and Clara happy.
Do they stay in, like, the continental part of Europe? Like, they don't go back to England?
For this next section, they're in Milan.
Okay.
They, like, go and they take up residence in a villa, and they amuse themselves by getting Clara all kinds of little they, like, find her, like, fancy jewelry and all of this.
Baubles.
And it's really lovely, but we don't really have the time for it because it's really lovely. And
It's not really a plot.
I think it's meant to, you're like,
Oh, a little soothing balm on this huge gaping wound.
yes. But the thing about contemporary post-apocalyptic narratives is that when they are about, like, plague or zombies, most of the time they seem to forget about the existence of other diseases. And you know who didn't forget?
Mary.
Which is what happens when all your apocalypse narratives are written by people who grew up with antibiotics.
Yeah, they, like, don't remember, like, oh, typhoid.
The world is trying to kill you all the time, soft boy.
Oh, scarlet fever.
So Evelyn dies of typhus.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. And it's tragic and heartbreaking. And Clara, poor Clara, is, like, nursing him to the last moment.
Of course.
And they are all devastated.
Yeah, can you imagine what it would be like to make it through a global plague that has killed everyone on Earth but 4 people, and to make it through that and then die of something else, like, within months?
I would be so mad.
Yeah. Mary, I'm enraged.
So,
Okay, so now there are 3.
So now we're down to 3, and as soon as Evelyn dies, Clara is basically like, if you want me to survive, we need to leave this place right now.
Oh,
Which is fair.
yeah.
She's like, I can't
be here.
I can't be anywhere close to this. This is the worst thing. Like, after all of that, this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to me because it's just so cruel.
Yes.
Clara, for the first time ever, makes exactly one request for herself, which is, get me the hell out of Milan. And then, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you take me to Greece, where you promised you would take me back eventually to show me my parents' tombs?
Who doesn't think to themselves, you know what will uplift me? The grave of my father who started this whole shitty situation.
And Lionel's like, I don't know if getting on a boat to go to Greece is a good idea.
And she's like, I've never asked you anything.
And Adrian or Clara are like, what are you worrying about? It's just a boat. What could be so frightening about a boat?
Oh, I don't know. Like every shipwreck ever. Oh, God, is this how they all die? Oh.
The annoyance.
I kind of am annoyed now. Now I understand why all those men hated this book back in the 1920s.
So they get on their cute little skiff and everyone's in a great mood and they are bopping off to Greece and everything is gonna be great. Except for that storm.
I was about to say.
Behind them.
The narrator. Everything was not great.
And, in the inky east, 2 vast clouds, sailing contrary ways, met. The lightning leapt forth, and the hoarse thunder muttered. Great God, and we alone, we 3, alone, soul dwellers on the sea and on the earth, we 3 must perish. A convulsion of despair crossed the love-beaming face of Adrian, while with set teeth he murmured, Yet they shall be saved. Clara, visited by a human pang, pale and trembling, crept near him. He looked on her with an encouraging smile. Do you fear, sweet girl? Do not fear. We shall soon be on shore. The darkness prevented me from seeing the changes of her countenance, but her voice was clear and sweet as she replied, Why should I fear? Neither sea nor storm can harm us, if mighty destiny or the ruler of destiny does not permit. And then the stinging fear of surviving either of you is not here. One death will clasp us undivided. But of course, unfortunately,
Obviously, Lionel's gonna live.
she's wrong, and the storm ultimately is too strong, and it breaks the boat into pieces, and Clara and Adrian are lost,
Swept away.
never to be seen again. And Lionel
Is now truly the last man on earth.
washes up on shore and is completely,
Bereft.
totally alone.
I just can't even really fathom.
Being,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I did watch the show, The Last Man on Earth, with Will Forte.
Yeah, but he's by himself for like
2 episodes.
Yeah. Someone shows up like immediately.
Yes. It was weird enough during the pandemic to see like cities empty
Yeah.
in like an I Am Legend way, like
Mm-hmm.
empty cities just like roaming, but by yourself.
Completely alone.
And what's the point?
Well,
Mary would say there isn't one.
that's what chapter 10 is about.
Yep.
The final chapter of the book
Yep.
is Lionel.
Saying life is not worth living if I'm totally alone without anyone to love me or to love.
Is Lionel trying to decide what to do with being the last human? And again, if you out there, the listener, if these episodes intrigue you, I would highly recommend even just picking this book up and reading sections of it, because the parts of it that make it kind of hard, as I mentioned in the first episode, a lot of the prose is very dense, but some of these passages, these kind of existential philosophical passages, they echo forward so poignantly, and I cannot read all of them. And even if you have kind of the framework of the plot and you just flip through it, there's so much in this book that is just so moving and thoughtful, and that is really like fiddling around with these really big questions about like what all of this means, what we mean.
Yeah, Mary's really going through it right now.
Yeah. Lionel kind of goes through, to project backwards, he goes through something akin to the stages of grief. Spends like 3 days basically being like, they're going to turn up. And then he spends something like a week just lying on the ground.
Sure.
Barely keeping himself alive. And then ultimately he sort of starts moving toward Rome, which was the plan all along. Every town he goes through on the way to Rome, he convinces himself that like he's going to find
just one other person.
Just one other person. And so he starts, in every town he goes through, he starts painting in the middle of town in 3 languages. Verney, the last of the race of Englishmen, has taken up his abode in Rome. Friend, come, I wait for thee.
Oh. Oh, Lionel, you're gonna wait forever.
And then along his journey, on the 25th day since he lost Adrian and Clara, he decides to stop keeping track of time.
Because what does it matter?
It says, why talk of days or weeks or months? I must grasp years in my imagination if I would truly picture the future to myself. 3, 5, 10, 20, 50 anniversaries of that fatal epoch might elapse. I needed no recorder of the inch and barleycorn growth of my life, while my unquiet thoughts created other divisions than those ruled over by the planets. And, in looking back on the age that had elapsed since I had been alone, I disdained to give the name of days and hours to the throes of agony which had in truth portioned it out.
Just like not even worth counting, because what's the point? Everything's the worst. Everyone I know is dead. And why would I want the anniversary of becoming the last person on Earth and losing the last people that I loved?
Yeah. He finds true despair.
Oh, he hadn't found it already?
That's, I think, rock bottom.
Oh, giving up time is his rock bottom?
Yeah.
Oh.
But then he sees a family of goats.
Okay.
He's wandering through the Italian countryside. He starts to notice nature again. And it says, I will discipline my sorrowing heart to sympathy in your joys. I will be happy because you are so. Live on, you innocents, nature's selected darlings. I am not much unlike you. Nerves, pulse, brain, joint, and flesh, of such I am composed, and you are organized by the same laws. I have something beyond this, but I will call it a defect, not an endowment, if it leads me to misery, while you are happy. And he sees this family of goats, and he starts to approach them. Mother goat, a baby goat, and a daddy goat. And he gets too close, and the daddy goat attacks him, and he picks up a rock, and he's about to attack it, and he stops himself.
Yeah, there's been enough death. Who is he to...
There's been enough death. He is simultaneously inspired by the fact that nature is still there and reminded in that moment that he is outside of it. He cannot live the way that the animals live. If there is anything worth living for, it is embracing
his humanity.
He has to embrace his humanity. He has no other choice. What he concludes is that he's going to go to Rome as he originally planned. And when he gets to Rome, he takes up occupation in, I think, the Vatican, because why not?
Why not?
And he writes the story. He writes the book that we are reading right now.
How very Frodo Baggins of him.
Yes. The libraries of Rome and the writing that he's doing gives him purpose.
Sure.
For a time. He starts the book. It's kind of endearing because he starts the book because he's wandering through an empty house and he finds writing materials. He finds someone else's partially finished book.
And he's like, I could do that. There should be a record of this.
The top page is a dedication, and it says, I will also write a book, I cried. For whom to read? To whom dedicated? And then, with silly flourish, what is so capricious and childish as despair? I wrote, dedicated to the illustrious dead. Shadows arise and read your fall. Behold the history of the last man. But then it says, Yet will not this world be repeopled, and the children of a saved pair of lovers, in some to me unknown and unattainable seclusion, wandering to these prodigious relics of the anti-pestilential race, seek to learn how beings so wondrous in their achievements, with imaginations infinite and powers godlike, had departed from their home to an unknown country?
I like that he's hopeful even in this very last moment. Like, surely, maybe somewhere there's some people who will have a baby who will repopulate the world.
Well, and so he spends a year writing this book, and he finishes it. It says, A year has passed, and I no longer guess at my state or my prospects. Loneliness is my familiar, sorrow my inseparable companion. I have endeavored to brave the storm. I have endeavored to school myself to fortitude. I have sought to imbue myself with the lessons of wisdom. It will not do. He concludes that no one is ever coming to Rome, and so he is going to leave Rome to look for them.
Oh, so he's just going to wander the earth for the rest of his days.
Yep.
Looking for someone.
So he ascends the Tower of St. Peter's and carves in its topmost stone the year 2100, last year of the world. And it turns out he does have one companion, a dog.
Man's best friend.
A shaggy fellow, half water and half shepherd's dog, who I found tending sheep in the Campagna. His master was dead, but nevertheless he continued fulfilling his duties in expectation of his master's return.
Oh, dogs are better than people.
If a sheep strayed from the rest, he forced it to return to the flock, and sedulously kept away every intruder. His delight was excessive when he saw me. He sprung up to my knees. He capered round and round, wagging his tail, with the short, quick bark of pleasure. He left his fold to follow me, and from that day has never neglected to watch by and attend on me, showing boisterous gratitude whenever I caressed or talked to him.
I suddenly like this book a lot more because I do think that dogs are better than like a lot of people. So I guess I'm heartened that at the end of the world, Lionel at least has a pup.
And so he cannot, will not, and I think from Shelley's perspective should not give up on hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is evident from the fact that he doesn't just like lie on the beach where he washes up and let himself be taken by the elements.
Right. And so
or that he even writes the book.
Right. He leaves his book behind. He leaves a message. And
so then how are we knowing what's happening now?
This is where we end. He talks of his dreams of, if he's going to be alone, he's going to be alone in all of the countries of the world, and maybe somewhere he will find somebody. And then it says, These are wild dreams. Yet since, now a week ago, they came on me, as I have stood on the height of St. Peter's, they have ruled my imagination. I have chosen my boat and laid in my scant stores. I have selected a few books. The principal are Homer and Shakespeare, but the libraries of the world are thrown open to me, and in any port I can renew my stock. I form no expectation of alteration for the better, but the monotonous present is intolerable to me. Neither hope nor joy are my pilots. Restless despair and fierce desire of change lead me on. I long to grapple with danger, to be excited by fear, to have some task, however slight or voluntary, for each day's fulfillment. I shall witness all the variety of appearance that the elements can assume. I shall read fair augury in the rainbow, menace in the cloud, some lesson or record dear to my heart in everything. Thus around the shores of deserted earth, while the sun is high and the moon waxes or wanes, angels, the spirits of the dead, and the ever-open eye of the Supreme, will behold the tiny bark, freighted with Verney, the last man. The end.
Oh. I do appreciate that she tried to end it in like a more hopeful way, and I do think it would be the very human thing to not be able to just sit.
Yes. People can't do that.
No, not in this situation, surely.
And I think it's hopeful-ish. But I also think that it's very...
I feel like it's also realistic in that, like, I know I'm probably not going to find anybody.
Yeah, but I
got to try.
Well, and I love that the only things he has to comfort himself with are the dog
And books.
and books. In the midst of one of the most bleak and despairing narratives I've read in a really long time,
Mm-hmm.
even in that last paragraph when he's talking about losing hope, even though you can tell it's so human and it's so well rendered, because you can tell that Verney himself is veering wildly between being like, I'm going to find somebody and
I'm never going to find
I'm
somebody.
never going to find somebody. But the fact that he notes, Verney, who very early in the narrative, if you remember, had like a very special love of learning and
Yes.
of knowledge. He notes that, the world's libraries are thrown open to me. Like,
If nothing else.
it's not enough, but it's something.
Yeah. It's enough to, like, keep moving.
Yeah.
And now I have this dog to depend on me.
Yep.
Or, to hang out with.
I got my books and I got my dog.
Yeah.
It's not enough, like I said,
But it's something.
but it's something. And so that's the last man.
That's how Mary ends it, huh? Yikes. Yike-a-rooney.
Mm-hmm.
She really draws it out.
Mm-hmm. She really draws it out. She really thought it through. Like, my God.
Yeah. She was like, this will not be swift. And I'm going to get into a weird amount of detail about some things and completely ignore the details of others. Now that we're done, also, I'm rethinking about this, like, interaction where Lionel gets the plague. Still makes no sense.
Still baffling.
Yeah.
Absolutely baffling.
That one has not clarified in any way now that we're done.
No. I don't know. You know as well as I do. It's very confusing.
Why
And-
do you think she picks Lionel?
To be the one who survives?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of scholars say that Adrian is Percy Shelley, Raymond is Byron, and Lionel is Mary.
And she's the sole survivor of their...
Yeah, that Lionel is her self-insert character. And at this point in her life,
Yeah, she's left with her books.
well, and she
And-
wrote letters she wrote a letter to someone right around this time where she referred to herself as essentially the last man, and that she was alone and that she'd watched everyone she loved either die or leave her.
Bleak.
Yeah.
Bleak, Mary. Bleak. Don't you know that at some point in the future, girlies will be obsessed with you? Little goth babes will be obsessed with you. Not for this book, God, but for the other one.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about Lionel versus thinking about her. And I definitely understand she's the last one of them. He's the last one. She just gave him a very interesting character arc.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why, going back to them as characters and not as parallels for real
Sure.
people, I think Adrian's arc is really interesting because he's the last king of England, right? But he never marries or has kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking in the previous episode about, is this sort of Shelley deciding she's a monarchist after all? Is this, and A of all, I don't think that's the case.
No.
But B of all, I think it's so interesting to have him literally be the last king of England no matter what, right?
Yeah, sure.
And Lionel, I think, is meant to be this kind of, he's everything. He's from the upper class, but he has an impoverished upbringing. He's encompassing kind of all of the best parts of what it means to be an Englishman.
Sure.
And he even, he evokes his upbringing after Adrian and Clara die, and he's drifting through the countryside completely alone. He basically makes a comment about how it's like going back to his childhood, sleeping rough
He
in the
was
hills.
just, roving about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he is this sort of like self-made character, and he's also, I feel like, the character who actually evolves,
Mm-hmm.
whereas every other character you meet is pretty set already in who they are.
Now, in fairness, we did not have time for everyone's character arcs.
That's okay, that's fair.
There is more Idris, Adrian, Raymond, and Perdita. They all have real and meaningful arcs. It's just that this book is so dense that we really kind of stayed focused on Lionel.
Yeah. Okay.
But in terms of this novel as like a refutation of all of the worst, most individualistic aspects of romanticism, I think that is the other reason that Lionel is so important. Adrian and Idris as characters are from the aristocracy. They are
Right.
They are raised with this kind of like sense of duty and putting others before themselves. And Lionel, is a man, not a woman. And so you have him and Raymond, who are both free. Adrian, intrinsically, as a result of who he is uninterested in doing anything besides putting others first. And he's an example, a beautiful example. Raymond and Lionel are significantly more self-propelled,
Sure.
I guess. Raymond is the bad example, Adrian is the good example, and Lionel is the man in the middle.
He's the real example.
And
In that, like, not no one, but mostly you can't, it's hard to be all one or all the other.
right.
We are all a spectrum of the in-between. And that's the thing that you need, I guess. It's that you have to have, like, some balance.
Yeah.
Lionel is balance.
And he learns the joy and importance of living for others just in time to lose them all.
Yes.
So if you remember, I talked about how this got critically panned because everyone was like, who asked you, Mary? No one wants to be this bummed out.
Correct. And to be fair, this is a bummer.
Well, I would like to draw your attention back to our framing device.
Oh, yes, I asked about this last episode.
So our framing device establishes that some kind of prophet
Yes.
has reached through the folds of time, hundreds of years into the future, and has transcribed this book onto leaves, which have then been discovered by someone in the year like 1819, who has
And
then
pieced them together.
transcribed it into a book, which means that canonically, within the book, the events of the book have not yet happened,
Correct.
which means that we still have the time to take the lessons of the book to heart and to learn from it and to live lives that are better and reflect Lionel's losses and devastation, right?
Yes, this, like, you still have the learn from my mistakes.
But that's textual. She gives that to us it's not just the world is ending, sucks to suck. Very importantly, textually within the book, we are given a present in which we are pre-prepared with all of this knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wonder how much of this was also not her wanting the world to end, but like could we adopt some of this before it get like
Right.
not even in 2040, but like right now.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I think that's what makes this book so radical and quietly actually hopeful, is that she takes the time to ground it in the presence. She takes the time to signal to the reader, you have been given this now.
Do you think that a lot of people at the time just sort of glazed over that or like didn't really make the full connection?
I think that the points that she is making about the inherent value of every human life and income inequality and maybe the excesses of aristocracy and the monarchy being their own punishment, I think nobody wanted to hear that shit.
Oh,
And
I'm
they-
sure that no one wanted to hear that. I'm just wondering.
And they especially didn't want to hear it from a disgraced woman.
like, who do you think you are, Mary?
Yes. They didn't want to hear it, and they especially didn't want to hear it from her, and so they weren't thinking about it all that carefully.
Yeah. Do you know what it was that triggered its re-release, like in the 60s or 50s?
No idea. This is also a little bit of a mea culpa. I had less time than usual to do the surrounding research and really had to hone in on the text, both because of time and life and the fact that the text itself is really dense. And I gotta say, like, one of the things that I found really interesting is as I was hunting around for scholarship, I kept coming up against papers that were like published in journals, like peer reviewed, that got the facts of the story wrong. one of the only essays I could find about race and this novel, which I was really trying to find, had a bunch of errors in it about the basic plot. And I was like, what is...
And it was like recent scholarship is in like 1960s forward.
Recent scholarship is in like last 10 years.
Oh.
And I was like, that's like...
This isn't actually what happens.
Yeah, it was very confused. I was like, did you read this?
Oh.
Did
weird.
you read it and misunderstand it?
Right. Or is there like, or were you trying really hard to pull something out that wasn't there?
And this is part of what I'm saying is that the prose is so dense that if you are skimming, it's very easy to... One of the things that this person got wrong was that they referred to... You remember the acrobat and then So this person referred to both the acrobat and the specter of death as being an actual goblin and an actual specter of death, respectively.
It's like...
No. Which would be easy to do if you're skimming because it's so much happens on every page.
But like they literally find him dying in the road, so...
Yeah, they like literally talk to... He's a real dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Poor Mary. That's really what this whole thing boils down to is, I'm sorry, Mary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna lie. This book sat really heavy with me.
I can't imagine it not.
I've had some stuff going on in my life, and I've had some stuff going on in friends' lives. And then on top of that, you know, like you were mentioning, like catastrophic flooding in the Carolinas and people getting walloped by the hurricane down on the coast. And like... Does
Lionel ever mention that ever again? Like once everyone's dead, does the climate thing sort of recede?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not, I mean, to be clear, Shelley isn't being like climate change, you know, like...
No, but he like doesn't meet any other like, or mention any other like, there were crazy storms in Rome or anything like that.
Not really, but like once Adrian and Clara are dead, it kind of shifts mostly to
his internal monologue.
Yeah,
I think the climate piece is particularly interesting. I think so many of us think of that as like a really modern idea. And it is modern in like the scope of the world. But the fact that she was already talking about that in any kind of way is sort of wild.
Yeah. And I mean, I think from her perspective, so she had lived through the summer that she wrote Frankenstein was the Year Without a Summer.
Yes.
And so she had lived through like some pretty bonkers climate phenomena. I think from her perspective, it's meant to be more biblical
and like spooky than it is as
like she's
modern readers were like, oh
yeah, like she's obviously not thinking about like humans have disrupted the climate of the like that's not something that's occurring to her.
No, but reading it from a modern lens, it's like
it's deeply uncomfortable.
Oh, Mary,
you're like, oh,
how
Mary,
did you predict all this so well? Yikes,
Mary, are you the prophet?
Are you sure? Are you writing on these leaves?
So yeah.
Are you glad you read it?
Yes. And that's what I was saying a minute ago is I personally lately have kind of been surrounded by loss, but like we have all been surrounded by loss. To read what I found to be like a really stirring refutation of like the rugged individualism that is like poisoning our country from the inside out, to read a novel that fundamentally wants you to walk away from it thinking about living for and with other people, like a novel that cares more about community at the end of the day than it does about any single person, and that full-throatedly over and over again says that like every single human life is an incomparable treasure and that the loss of even one is a tragedy. That means a lot to me. And I think these are really important things to remember. And I'm sorry that this is like not funny, haha, but it means a lot.
No, I mean, I don't think there's not a ton. We've really moved away from that. And not that I think that was ever, I think that that's why this is sort of a radical book in a lot of ways. But most fiction is not based in that.
The form of the novel itself,
it's not made for that. Like it's
encourages a sort of individual
point of view. And so the fact that she has managed to make you walk away with such a strong feeling around community and greater good is not something I even feel like people are writing about currently in large scale.
You don't find a lot of it. It's hard to do and it's hard to find. I think one of the most interesting things about the novel is, like, you don't want to be Lionel. You don't leave the novel being like, wow, Lionel's so cool.
Wish I were Lionel.
And I think that
Gonna
happens...
be Lionel for Halloween.
And I think that happens with a lot of post-apocalyptic narratives.
Well, because they almost always are centered in some sort of like either savior complex or martyr complex, or they're just like heavily gratuitous like so much gratuitous violence that you're just like, oh, this like badass dude is gonna
yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's a lot bleaker than that.
Yeah.
It's a lot bleaker than that.
You know, happy are the characters in this novel who got to die a little bit earlier surrounded by their loved ones.
Right. Or even like in some ways like the blessing of Clara and Adrian's death for them, not for Lionel, but the fact that the two of them got to just go together.
Yeah.
To Clara's point, like, oh, if we go, we all go. Well, it didn't happen for poor Lionel, which is why, again, no one wants to be Lionel. But for Adrian and Clara, like, that's best case scenario.
Best case Ontario.
Yeah.
Well, my darling, any final thoughts?
No, I'm plumb wrung out. Mary's really squeezed every last bit of joy, thought, emotion from me.
I would like to take a moment to promise the listeners that the rest of October is going to be like funny, haha, silly, spooky stories about like vampires and queerness. And
so you just had to muddle through this with me.
Getting cock-blocked by a ghost.
So tune in next week.
We're going to give you a tonal break. We're going to lean into spooky season, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun and upbeat.
It's going to be fun. God damn it. I'll unclench my jaw at some point. If I unclench it, I'll just fall into a pile of bones on the floor at this point.
Maddie, thank you so much for being here with me today.
You are more than welcome.
I look forward to having you back in November for Northanger Abbey, right?
Yes, we're going to have a little less commonly read Jane Austen moment.
Some good gothic fun.
Yes, silly billies.
Thank you all so much for being here with me. Thank you for joining us on this journey through The Last Man. We'll be back next week with, like I said, some more upbeat spooky season shenanigans. And until then, as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use the love. Bye.
Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, recorded, and edited by me, Grace Todd. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter at Didn't Read It.
Our theme song is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
For sources cited and a full list of episodes, you can visit us at didntreaditpod.com.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review. It makes a big difference, and we appreciate it immensely.
If you did not enjoy the show, we are accepting applications for a full-time nemesis at didntreaditpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia, and to Pesca Trio Publishing.